Hi Not Board Gamers, and welcome back to Not Board Gaming. I'm your host, I'm Mark. Now in today's video I'm going to be taking a slightly different look at a Kickstarter preview, and I'm going to be discussing as a solo player whether you should back the Dark Quarter from Lucky Duck Games and Ryder Games. That's right, it's a collaboration between Lucky Duck and Ryder. So why am I doing a video on, should you back the game as a solo player? I think there's lots of videos out there already in how the Dark Quarter plays. And if you want to go and look at those videos, absolutely great. Will Brown at The Hungry Gamer's got a really good video, shows you the overview of the game, etc. But I think as solo gamers, one thing that's been lacking from a lot of Lucky Duck games is the solo experience. I think we go right back and we have a look at Chronicles of Crime and the Chronicles of Crime saga. Now, I enjoyed playing them solo, but they are obviously games designed to be played with other people, and the more people you play it with, the more fun you have as you're kind of discussing the clues, etc. As a solo player, it's an okay game. Then we move on to Destinies, which was kind of the next iteration of some of the mechanisms from Chronicles of Crime, but Destinies added the kind of tiles and the map and your characters as you're moving across the board, investigating. It made it more of a board game experience. But it felt really flat for me as a solo gamer. I didn't like Destinies. I think there are 2 solo modes in there, and neither of them worked. And I think part of that as well in Destinies was the fact that the story was just full of kind of standard fantasy tropes as well, and I had no engagement in the story in Destinies. However, the kind of clever dice system and the kind of cube system that they use in Destinies was a winner. I thought it was really clever and really intuitive how you use it, and that's been carried over into Dark Quarter. Now, Lucky Duck have obviously been listening to what people say and understanding that the narrative in Destinies wasn't the strongest, so they've teamed up with Ryder Games. That's right, the kind of experts behind kind of narrative and solo games. So you have Final Girl, you have Hostage Negotiator, you have those wonderful books that they do. Ryder know how to build a story. And I will say that I think that it's potentially something that has been lacking from some of Lucky Duck's hybrid games. And Lucky Duck have made this commitment to go hybrid with digital integration into their board games. So Dark Quarter is kind of a real step up from that, and it's designed by Evan Derrick, who of course is from Ryder Games. With the he was one of the designers behind Final Girl and Hostage Negotiator. So you can see this pedigree starting to come together. So as I say, the aim of the video is to discuss, as a solo gamer, should you back the Dark Quarter? The first thing we need to discuss is the digital integration of the app. If you do not like app-based games, then of course you shouldn't back the Dark Quarter. However, if you don't mind or you enjoy the digital experience, then I would say that the app is a real selling point on this. The app is wonderfully thematic in terms of the atmosphere it sets, in terms of the music, in terms of the dialogue or the script that's in there, the story that you start to unfold throughout it, and it's really intuitive to use. Yes, the Dark Quarter comes with a rule book, and pretty much if you played Destinies, you know that you can read through that rule book once and play the game, and potentially play the game almost without reading the rule book. The app guides you along what you need to do, and that's a really, really important thing. A lot of the action does take place on the app though, so it does become a more important part than apps in potentially other games, I don't know, such as Descent, Journeys in the Dark. Journeys in the Dark. Yes, there's app in that, and it is a large part of the game. The app is a very large part of the Dark Quarter. So if you don't like digital app integration, then it may not be for you. However, if you don't mind it and you want this kind of narrative experience which is told to you through the app, and it's got the atmospheric music, and it handles things like the combat or the investigation abilities, and you have the ability to scan cards as well, then that is really, really useful. Of course, also in the app you will get the board, and you will get access to the tiles that you lay out on the board as well. You see, as well as having a main board which has got like almost a satellite view of New Orleans, you get some cards, and when you hit certain areas, it'll tell you to lay these cards out, and that gives you a zoomed in view where you will place kind of tokens on there to say what's happening. And that's really nice and intuitive as well. The app tells you to do that. Is it possible to play the game without the board, without the cards, just the core components and the app, like it was in Destinies? where you didn't need the map tiles? And the answer is possibly yes. But if you do, you're robbing yourself of an experience. You see, when you want to play a game like The Dark Quarter, you want an immersive experience. You want the narrative to take hold of you. And if you don't have the map there and you don't lay the tiles there, you're kind of robbing yourself of that experience. So yes, you could play it without the board effectively and without the tiles, but I wouldn't really recommend that. And if you're doing that, you're not going to have a great experience. It's not going to immerse you in the gameplay. I like the app. I think the app is very well done. Does all the heavy lifting, and it carries you over from scenario to scenario. You see, in the prototype version that was sent through very kindly by Lucky Duck Games, they just give you access to one scenario. But there are 4 scenarios in the game, and they're all on the app, and your actions carry over from scenario to scenario. And there are also critical choices that you make at certain points, and they will stay with your character throughout it. The kind of thing that is kind of impossible to do without an app. So the app works seamlessly. It works very, very well. It feels intuitive to use the app. I do like the app. The app is kind of a major part of it. The other major part is the story. Now, I will say up front, it's got very, very mature themes in here. We're dealing with instances of the occult. We're dealing with bad language, sexual tension in there, etc. Very, very mature themes in the story. And the story has to be strong to want to carry you across the number of scenarios that are planned to be released with this, and I'm sure Lucky Duck have many more up their sleeves as well that could come out for this. So the story has to be strong. For me, Destinies did not have a story, and that's what took me away from Destinies. I just didn't feel any connection to it. The Dark Quarter is set in New Orleans if you like, in the 1980s. Now, I love the 80s, right? Okay, I was born in 1970. The 80s were my teenage years. I love the 80s. Anything to do with the 80s, I absolutely love. And as soon as I started playing the game, turned on the app, chose a character to play, I was there. The writing is wonderfully strong in this. You feel the story. You feel connected to it. You feel like your actions are making a difference. I am totally invested in the story. It's some of the best narrative I've seen of this kind of ilk, if you like. And it's certainly some of the best narrative I've read. You choose a character. So I chose John Robichaud for my playthrough as kind of this grizzled cop, if you like, with a dead wife. You also have Constance Moreau you can choose, Julia Paris. So Constance is like a voodoo person. Julia Paris is a vampiric type person. Or Walter Mullins, who I see dead people. He speaks to dead people. And each one has got their own abilities. And the great thing about it is no matter which characters you choose, and as a solo player, you could choose 1, 2, 3, or all 4 if you wanted to. They each have their own kind of side stories that meld seamlessly into the main story that you're going through. So you could play through it with one character, and then you could play through it again with a separate character, another character, and have a slightly different kind of journey through there, because you'll be exploring their side quests as well as the main side quests. But to go back to the story, it feels dark, it feels gritty, it feels really well written. I feel like I'm in New Orleans and the rain is coming down and I'm investigating and there's Mardi Gras in the background, but there's this underbelly happening. I am totally immersed in this story. I am totally invested in this story, and I am totally upset that I only got 1 of the 4 scenarios to complete, because I need to know where this story goes. I am in from the get-go on this. So if you like a strong narrative in your games, then this is certainly for you. And as a solo player, I think that's really, really important, that you want to be invested in the story. The next thing is kind of playability and replayability. That is always going to be an issue with a kind of an investigative type game. Of course, once you've solved the scenario, then it's difficult to go back and solve it again, because you're just going to be going through some of the same stuff. Of course, I've already mentioned the fact that your characters all have kind of different backstories and side stories. And that will add an element of replayability into there. But in reality, it's probably going to be kind of one and done through each scenario, which sounds bad. But scenario number 1 took me about 2 hours to complete. So if you look over the 4 scenarios, that's 8 hours of gameplay that you have just on one character. Now, the fun of playing it again comes in choosing another character and seeing what that journey takes. And each one has their own kind of strengths and abilities, so their questioning techniques may be different, their combat techniques may be different, etc. And you know, the joy is finding out how each one works. And also, as a solo gamer, because it's kind of fully cooperative, not semi-co-op, it's fully cooperative, you're playing through this journey of a story, that you could play it with different combinations of characters and try those through. But, you know, admittedly, the kind of playability, it is limited, as it is in all these games, with the kind of, you know, how much you want to replay the same story. And that's okay, because knowing Lucky Duck, they've probably got plenty of expansions kind of planned for this, plenty of ways to integrate new characters, new techniques, new stories into this, into the game. So that could aid playability. So I think that, yeah, depending on your view on it and depending on the price point for this, I got a feeling that this is going to kind of hit the same kind of price point as Destiny's. And if you think the main game is going to have between 8, 10, maybe 12 hours worth of play in there for a solo player, that's not bad value. I've certainly spent a lot less on something that lasts, a lot more, sorry, on something that lasts a lot less. So I think that, you know, the playability can be an issue, but you know that going in. It's an investigative game where you're aiming towards an end goal. Once you've solved it, then how much you're going to enjoy replaying it depends on, you know, whether you want to go back and replay it or whether you want to see if you can get to a slightly different conclusion, make different decisions throughout the scenarios, because as I say, you've got these critical points where, or these critical decisions you're going to make, and they will affect your character as time goes on. So playability, replayability from a solo perspective, playability, fantastic. Replayability, maybe less so. Put it back on the shelf for 6 months, take it back off, you'll have forgotten a lot of the stuff and you can absolutely play it again and certainly play it with other characters. Mechanisms. Let's talk about mechanisms. I've already mentioned the app. Now, if you think about Chronicles of Crime, you were kind of scanning cards all your time in Chronicles of Crime. Similar thing for Destiny's, but less so, if you like, and this is even less so. You see, yes, there are cards to scan and that you need to scan. They could be items or they could be story cards, etc., that you get, or stuff for the bureau. But each turn, your player gets to scan one item, so it's not heavily kind of laden on scanning of items. And I think that's really good, because I think one of the things of Chronicles of Crime, you get into a bit of a scan frenzy. You think, oh, does this work with this? Does this work with this? And it kind of takes you out of the experience. Very cleverly here, kept scanning to a minimum. It absolutely helps if you scan the right item at the right time and ask the right person about this particular item, then that can open up your various lines of investigation for you. So I think that's a neat mechanism. You know that going in, that it's going to have cards with QR codes on there, and there is going to be an element of scanning, but that's okay. If you know that going in and you don't mind scanning and you're aware of the fact that it's kept to quite a minimum, then that's a really good thing. The next thing is, of course, the dice play as well, because there is dice on the in the game, and you start with kind of 2 main dice, and then you can add additional dice each turn, and you get to roll all those dice to see what kind of statistics you're rolling against a particular thing. So be it, I don't know, investigation. You choose how many dice you want to roll, and that could include the dice that you add every turn, and then that total number, you then marry up the total number of your results from there, from the number of where your cubes are on your board. And there are 3 cubes on your board to start off with for each kind of stat that you do. And if, say, I roll an 8 and I've got cubes on 4 and 7, that gives me kind of 2 goes at my investigation there, so 2 questions to ask. If I roll a 10 and I've got cubes on 4, 7 and 9, then that gives me 3. So there is an element of luck in there. When you use these dice, you put them to one side, and that means you then back down to the remaining dice on your board. You've always got these 2 big dice to do there. So that there is an element of luck, and that can be frustrating, because no matter how good you are and how good you get, that luck is always going to play a part, and you could be a really critical point and you roll badly on the dice. So that you have to be okay with an element of luck in the game. Now, there are ways to mitigate it, because certain items you will pick up, and you get certain ability cards that you get as well. You will start with one ability card, I think it is, or two ability cards, but you get a chance to open more up because you start earning experience to each scenario, and those ability cards will add you certain things. So, for example, during a combat test, for each star that I roll, which is a success, set that die to 1 and roll an additional exhausted die. So that gives me access to, so I get an automatic success and access to an exhausted die as well. So that improves your chance through having these item cards. So yes, luck plays a big part in the game, but the mitigation of that luck is also possible with these kind of ability cards that you get. So that's interesting. But again, you're kind of, that doesn't really affect whether you're a solo player or a multiplayer. It's down to how much you enjoy rolling dice in your game and how much you like luck to have a kind of a part of your game. Now, with an investigative story like this, luck obviously feels thematically relevant there as well, because as good as a detective is, or as good as an investigator is, an element of luck always plays out, but that luck can work against you. So I think that's a really important thing to note. So that's kind of some of the core aspects of the game. Then we look at the production quality, and I say the production is absolutely, it's fine, it's perfect, it kind of fits thematically with what you've got. If you've seen Destinies, you know exactly what it is. There are also minis in the game for the investigators and some key characters in the game that you will experience. I think the base game is going to come with a grand total of 8 minis. The rest are going to be made up of tokens like this. That's great. Don't get me wrong, the entire game could be tokens. The minis are really kind of perfunctory and just to add some visual flair on there. They don't add anything to the game whatsoever, so they could be tokens. But by keeping this quantity down to 8, then I think that's a really good, for the entire base game, I think that's a really, really good amount. You've got your 4 investigators and 4 other key characters, which I'm not going to talk about, for your minis. And therefore, if you have an aversion to minis, there's only 8 in the game. I would like to see tokens for the main characters instead of minis as well. But, if there's only just a few minis, then that's okay. But again, as a solo gamer, that won't really affect you. It helps keep you in a nice place on the map. So that's kind of an overview of everything. We talked about the app integration, we talked about the minis, we talked about the mechanisms, we talked about the kind of playability and replayability, and we've also spoken about the strong story. So as a solo gamer, should you back the Dark Quarter by Lucky Duck Games and Van Ryder Games? Well, here's the thing. You have to know what you're getting into, and I think that's a key thing. Strong narrative-based games aren't for everyone, and this is a really strong narrative-based game. I cannot tell you how impressed I am with the immersion in the story so far. So if you're a solo gamer and you fancy a game that's dark, gritty, with mature themes, you can turn the lights down, pour yourself a glass of whiskey, then the Dark Quarter is certainly going to hit that for you, because this kind of 80s theme, investigation, you can almost hear some kind of saxophone wailing in the distance as the rain patters on the window. You get exactly that feeling from playing Dark Quarter. It grabbed me from the get-go, and I really enjoyed that. And as a solo game, it's like reading an interactive book, this. All the gameplay mechanisms are great, and the gameplay is great, but what I'm really invested in is that story, that narrative, and that's really important for me as a solo gamer in this type of game. Key thing for solo gamers is going to be the playability and the replayability. So I mentioned, we've got 4 scenarios in the main box, each one taking 2-3 hours. I don't know, I've only played the first scenario, which took me about 2 hours to play through. So that has to be a factor as a solo gamer. This is not, as a solo gamer, this won't be a shared experience for you. This is going to be sitting down for a couple of hours over a week's period and kind of investing your time in the equivalent of this kind of really good novel, this good book. But realizing that, like all good books, it comes to an end. You can read a book again, but you're always going to get the same thing, get the same kind of conclusion at the end of it. And that's going to be more or less the same here. There is the added bonus and benefits of having various characters with various side stories, etc., that will change how you play. And also, I love the fact that the decisions you make, some of the critical decisions you make, carry over from scenario to scenario as well. So I think that's a really interesting thing as a solo game, and know what you're getting into on this. Know that this is, you know, the time that you spent in this on this game is going to be your time, but you've got to appreciate everything else that happens in the back end of it. I am totally invested. I will be backing the hell out of this because I think that, you know, it scratches very particular itches for me. One of the key things being, as I've already mentioned a number of times, having a strong narrative, and it feels like a game with a really strong narrative. The decisions that you make in the game feel kind of meaningful as well. I think Destiny's, I just spent too much time just flailing around and didn't care about anything. Chronicles of Crime, it's very easy to go down red herrings. Don't get me wrong, there are red herrings involved in this, but you're going to get constant prompts from the agency to try and bring you back on track in terms of your timing as well. But you do get that sense that you are making meaningful decisions, that you are unearthing this this kind of mystery as you go along. And again, if you like that feel, then this will definitely be for you. Now, the remaining aspects in terms of as a solo gamer, you know, in terms of whether you like dice mechanics, whether you like miniatures, or whether you like app integration, that applies kind of across the board, if you like, whether you're a solo gamer or not. And you're going to have to make your own choices on that. But for me, as I mentioned, I'm going to be backing the hell out of this game. I want everything to do with Dark Quarter. I don't care that I've already played the first scenario. When the Kickstarter version comes, I will be playing this first scenario again, and I will play it with multiple characters because I just want to be immersed in that wonderful narrative, in that world of New Orleans in the 1980s, in this gritty, mature-themed, cult-led murders, vampires, you name it, they're thrown in there, but they're not kind of the main focus of it. It feels still like very much like an 80s gritty Angel Heart type movie, if you like, and it hits the nail on the head. So everything else, app integration, the minis, the dice, only you can answer that. The other stuff, in terms of playability and replayability, yes, it's limited, but you know that going in, and therefore you can make your choice on that. And the story, if you love thematic and deeply immersive stories and a really strong narrative, then you're not going to be going far wrong with the Dark Quarter. So there we go. I hope that has given you an overview on my thoughts, kind of some of the key elements of Dark Quarter as a solo gamer. And I think it's important that we differentiate the solo experience from the multiplayer experience. There's always going to be stuff that kind of melds together, but solo gamers, we generally have slightly different needs. You know, if you playing with other people, some of them may not be as invested in the story as you, but they may feed off your energy. As a solo gamer, you're either a narrative gamer or you're not a narrative gamer. And if you are a narrative gamer, you need that investment in there, and that's what this gives in spades. So for me personally as a solo gamer, I highly recommend the Dark Quarter by Lucky Duck Games. I think it's really kind of taken the next level in Lucky Duck's evolution and Van Ryder Games' evolution to deliver a strong solo hybrid experience. Yeah, I like this game a lot. So thank you very much for joining me on this slightly different Not Bored Gaming video about Dark Quarter. I just wanted to tackle it in a slightly different way because there are plenty of gameplay videos out there, plenty of people showing you the mechanisms, plenty of ways to spoil the story for you. But as a solo gamer, I did not want to do that because there's nobody else to share this experience with you. I just wanted to tell you my thoughts on why I am backing the Dark Quarter by Lucky Duck and Van Ryder Games. So, my name's Mark, this is Not Bored Gaming. Thank you very much for joining me on this journey. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, check out our other videos, and one final thought. If you can't find anyone else to play with, there's nothing wrong with playing with yourselves. Until next time, bye-bye.